I wanted to give you some honest information about speeds when it comes to archery. Now, I can tell you from my past experience, I feel like I'm able to give you some honest information on this because I've actually been part of bow manufacturing since I was 18 years old, starting at the first company I worked with, and throughout the last 3 decades, I've actually been at 3 different companies, and I've been in the archery industry for a long time, seeing how speeds and the speed wars have been bent for rules, one in regards to advertising, but also the truth to how it really is compared to what you see in an ad or sometimes in a commercial. So there's a couple different things that are all critical to speed, and really the importance to this is that as a consumer, you know that just a couple feet a second really doesn't do that much when it comes to the performance that you're experiencing. Now, what I will say is over the course of time, the industry standards have tightened up a little bit in order to force the bow companies into having truer speeds. Now, there's certainly some that are very tight to those rules and some that are a little bit more flexible to the rules. And the industry really hasn't made any type of solid enforcement on speeds in the industry. So I want to just give you some of the information that changes speeds, but also can have an immediate impact on bow reviews when companies or individuals may not truly be comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So I guess before we start, one of the most obvious things I can talk about that's going to give a lot of variation in speed is the type of chronograph someone has, whether it's a company or whether it's an individual, whether it's a magazine that's testing or whether it's someone on YouTube also giving you a test. Some chronographs give very different speeds based on the type of lighting they have, whether they're being shot outside or whether they're lit with LEDs or whether they're running off a different type of light. Some of the radars that are out there give you, in my opinion, a little bit more accurate speed. However, some of the ones that are out there, you do have to be a little bit further from the bow in order to get that speed. So there's pros and cons. Now, what I will say is regardless of the bow manufacturer that I've worked for or represented, I can say that every R&D lab has their favorite chronograph. Many of them, including one of the first places I was, just ordered tons of chronographs until we found the one that produced the highest speed number when shot through there, because obviously if we can document that's the speed, then that's the speed. Some calibrations are slightly different even on the same chronographs than others. So a lot of the manufacturers are going to find that superior chronograph in relation to giving you the better speed. Now, just like with a variation in chronographs, you can also have a variation in your arrow scales, which recently the industry has actually tightened up that arrow weight margin for a plus and minus much better than we had in the past. Likewise, the bow scales, one type of brand scale versus another type of bow scale can also give you a variation versus a machine like an Instron machine that is deadly accurate and some companies use as their poundage checking machine. Some of the hand scales can be manipulated. I think any of you who are target archers who ever had to use a hand scale to draw to check in before an event, we've all kind of figured out how you can twist them or manipulate them to get a little bit lower poundage than what you're actually shooting, which in a speed test is going to be important, because if the speed reflects a number based on a bow that's actually 72 pounds versus 70 pounds, then we're, once again, not comparing apples to apples. The other thing that's critical is your strings and how the bows are actually being used when they're tested. Now, one of the things that I haven't seen the industry enforce is what type of material, what type of string count, or what type of diameter that string needs to be while tested to give the consumer a speed rating. Some companies use bowstrings that have less strands and also a smaller center serving in order to reduce the weight of that string and produce higher speeds. Some companies also change their speed knocks to give them better speed through the chronograph. However, as you have changed the weight on the string and where that's located, you might get better speed, but you also might get better or more vibration. So those companies may have speed knocks in a certain orientation for a speed check, but then they relocate those so that there isn't as much vibration in that string to the end consumer. So you may get a bow that really isn't hitting the speed numbers when you're buying one off a rack versus what that bow is doing in a speed lab specifically. Now, one of the other things that greatly affects speed is going to be the center serving, and not only the length of it or thickness of it, because I've been with some companies that when they send their bows off to get an independent speed check, they make sure that that serving barely allows the arrow to clip on there so that it's coming off smoother and giving you an extra 1 or 2 feet per second. Some have very, very minimal knocking points, again, so that they're not losing speed by having more weight in the center of the string. And some companies have a little bit smaller serving on their speed checked bows just so that they can get that increased speed, even though the serving is going to be bigger when it goes to you, the consumer. So these are all critical things that are important for speed. I've seen companies, really focus on extra lubrication on the cam system so that it's going to fire faster through a chronograph for testing. But that extra lubrication is not something they'd want on a bow that's going out in the field because it'll attract dirt. I've seen a lot of things fighting for 1 or 2 feet per second. But the reality is, once you get the bow and you're checking the speed, you're probably going to get a better idea of what that bow is really doing from every other one that's coming out of the box versus one that's getting tested just for a single advertisement. Now, the way speed measuring works is it's based off, for the most part, IBO, so the International Bowhunters Organization. It's based on their speed check system, which is measured of 5 grains of arrow weight per pound of bow weight. So on a 70-pound bow, the lightest arrow that you could shoot would be 350 grains. And with the new margins that are in place, you really can't go even above 351 grains for that arrow. So depending on your poundage, if you're staying IBO speeds, you would have to have 5 grains per pound to match. So for example, when I've checked speeds for you, I actually have arrows that I've had built a long time, which I have an arrow that's exactly 300 grains for a 60-pound check. I have an arrow that's exactly 350 grains for a speed check, and you can see I've shaved down fletchings so that I could just get this arrow exactly to the speed. And then I also have a heavier arrow where I've added extra wrap to it so that I could have this arrow that's heavy enough for an 80-pound speed check. So you have to keep in mind there's an ability to sway speed numbers. And for you, the consumer, don't let your decision on what bow you're going to buy be based off a few feet per second, because it's not really something that you're going to see down range. And the reality is you should probably always look at what a speed rating is and kind of realize that once you've built your bow, you've put knocking points and a D loop and a peep sight in your string, you're going to get less speed than what's advertised. And certainly as you increase the weight of your arrow, which most bow hunters are not going to have 5 grains per pound as arrow weight, then you're also not going to be able to achieve that speed. I think speed is important. I think the industry needs to keep promoting it, but I also think that as I educate people on what to look for, I'm hoping that there's more neutral-based information that's put out there in relation to speeds and truly comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I will say that I think as an industry we are getting better, but I do think we're definitely not perfect. The good thing to take away from this is as consumers, bows have gotten much quicker than they were even 10 years ago. We're getting very close to max efficiency in these cam systems. And the reality is we have awesome archery equipment that's giving us the ability to shoot projectiles at even better numbers than we ever have. So I don't think it's a matter of judging a few feet per second. As consumers, we're as far ahead as we've ever been, and these newer bows are much more pleasant to shoot, getting the speeds that we have. But make sure if you're ever doing a comparison, think about all these things that I've talked about. If you ever have a bow that's factory and you go to a replacement string and cable system, you also might want to really think about what your previous model bow was made for with string materials and strand counts if you are a person that's chasing speed.